What if a single spreadsheet-friendly unit, CO2e, quietly rewired how corporations talk about the planet, make decisions, and slap labels on products? Welcome to Unboxd Origins. I'm Howie, your resident science geek and accidental trivia sponge.
And I'm Wyatt. I ask the big questions. Sometimes philosophical, often skeptical, always curious.
Today we're digging into how did CO2e become the language of corporate climate responsibility? Let's start with the problem CO2e was invented to solve. How do you compare apples to oranges when the apples are carbon dioxide and the oranges are methane, nitrous oxide, or fluorinated gases? Scientists developed the idea of global warming potential, a way to convert different greenhouse gases into a common unit based on how much warming they cause over a given time horizon. Put simply, CO2 becomes the lingua franca. That technical convenience was first harnessed politically by the Kyoto Protocol, adopted in 1997 and entering into force in 2005, which created an international framework with binding targets for developed countries and used CO2 equivalent units in its accounting. Once policymakers agreed they could convert everything into CO2 equivalents, suddenly you had a standard unit for targets, trading, and accounting. From that diplomatic moment, a suite of institutions and standards filled in the details. Nonprofits and scientific bodies translated scientific constructs into accounting rules. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol provided guidance for measuring corporate emissions across operations and supply chains. ISO 14064 created an international standard for greenhouse gas inventories. And regional and national schemes like the EU Emissions Trading System, launched in 2005, started turning those inventory numbers into financial instruments. Meanwhile, the private sector needed something they could explain to investors and boards. CO2e fit the bill. It's compact, it's comparable across time, and crucially, it plugs into risk frameworks that finance folks already understand. At the same time, a new data economy emerged. Organizations like CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, asked companies to disclose emissions using standardized metrics. Rating agencies, consultancies, and environmental auditors developed methodologies to convert complex supply chain flows into CO2e estimates. Product-level schemes followed. The Carbon Trust and PAS 2050 pioneered methods to calculate the carbon footprint of goods so that a manufacturer could say, credibly, how many kilograms of CO2e a widget embodied. Those product labels and corporate disclosures might have seemed niche a decade ago, but they made CO2e visible to consumers, investors, and regulators, all speaking the same numerically tidy language. What pushed CO2e from technical standard to boardroom staple was investor pressure and the language of financial risk. Investors realized climate risk affects asset value, physical risks to facilities, transition risks from policy shifts, and reputational risks that hit revenues. Frameworks like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, framed climate in financial terms, and CO2e allowed companies to quantify exposures. Big asset managers began demanding emissions data. When the folks who control capital asked for a single, comparable metric, companies reorganized to produce it. Internal carbon pricing, Scope 1, 2, 3 strategies, and net zero pledges all lean on CO2e as the currency of measurement.
Aha! And here's the twist people often miss. CO2e is less a pure scientific truth and more a social technology designed for legibility. By forcing a messy, multi-gas, multi-timescale problem into one neat number, we made climate legible to accountants and marketers. But we also embedded value judgments, choosing a 100-year global warming potential instead of 20 years, deciding whether to include Scope 3 emissions or allowing certain offsets. Each choice tilts the ledger, so the same metric that enables comparison also hides the debate about what matters most: immediate warming, long-term concentration, or territory-specific impacts.
Exactly. That aha is crucial. Corporations and investors wanted a single measure so they could benchmark, set targets, and track progress. But those choices introduce opportunities for both clarity and strategic shaping. There's a category of corporate behavior we now recognize: metrics-driven optimization. Companies will optimize to the metric, not always to the underlying physical outcome. If a retailer can reduce reported CO2e by outsourcing manufacturing to countries with cleaner grids on paper, or by purchasing dubious offsets, they meet investors' demands without necessarily reducing real-world warming, as much as the numbers suggest. This is why the governance around CO2e, auditing, standardized life cycle analysis, and robust offset quality became an urgent next step. That pressure machine is powerful. The Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, and similar efforts emerged to constrain corporate ambition to what science says is needed, not what PR allows. SBTI uses CO2e as the unit for targets, telling companies how much to cut across scopes. But because Scope 3, emissions from suppliers and customers, often dwarf Scope 1 and 2, corporations had to reach into purchasing decisions, product design, and even M&A to meet their numbers. In effect, CO2e turned a moral and scientific problem into procurement strategies, engineering roadmaps, and executive scorecards. It moved climate from CSR brochures into procurement meetings and capital budgets.
Aha! Another underappreciated wrinkle. CO2e gave rise to a global infrastructure for trading and offsets. Once everything was in CO2e, emissions reductions could be traded across borders and sectors. Carbon markets expanded, and so did the offset industry. That's a double-edged sword. On one hand, markets can channel finance to low-cost reductions worldwide. On the other, when CO2e credits are cheap or poorly verified, they can enable headline-grabbing net zero claims without commensurate atmospheric benefit. So the story of CO2e is also a story about building markets and then discovering the governance needed to prevent perverse incentives.
Right, and that's why regulators are stepping in. Disclosure rules, auditing requirements, and proposals from securities regulators aim to standardize what counts as a credible CO2e reduction. The reason regulators care is simple. CO2e-based disclosures affect investment decisions and therefore market stability. If a pension fund buys an asset premised on low reported emissions and later discovers those numbers were optimistic, they face financial loss. So accuracy in CO2e reporting is becoming a fiduciary issue, not just an environmental one. That's how a unit born in climate science ended up central to corporate governance. It's also reshaped consumer narratives. Product carbon labels gave shoppers a simple comparator. This yogurt is X grams CO2e, that laptop is Y kilograms CO2e. For a segment of consumers, that's powerful. But it also invites simplification. Shoppers don't see the assumptions like allocation rules and life cycle assessment or supply chain boundaries. Hence campaigns for more transparency about methodology and for labels that contextualize CO2e alongside social impacts and longevity.
Aha! And maybe the most philosophical aha. CO2e normalized a way of valuing the planet's atmosphere as a shared accounting ledger. That's radical. For centuries, commons and local environmental harms were addressed in different ways. By standardizing a global unit, we declared the atmosphere a quantified commons, manageable through markets, regulations, and corporate balance sheets. That move is practical and contested. It reflects a particular worldview that sees emissions primarily as calculable externalities rather than embedded injustices or local ecological losses.
Summing up the mechanics, CO2e became widespread because it solved a technical comparability problem, was institutionalized through international agreements and standards, and was then turbocharged by investor and consumer demand. data platforms, auditors, and benchmarkers turned CO2e into a commodity for reporting. Corporations adopted it because it allowed them to measure, compare, set targets, and crucially, communicate their climate strategy to stakeholders in a way that finance and operations could digest.
And why it matters? When a universal metric shapes strategy, it shapes outcomes. CO2e has been profoundly useful. It enabled action at scale, allowed markets and regulators to engage, and brought emissions into corporate governance. But it also concentrates power in how metrics are defined and applied. That makes the governance of CO2e, the science behind GWP choices, the inclusiveness of scopes, the integrity of offsets, and the transparency of life cycle assumptions, one of the most important policy debates of our time.
So when you see CO2e on a product label, in a Vesta report, or board deck, know that you're looking at the end product of decades of science, diplomacy, accounting design, and market pressure. It's a brilliant piece of standardization that made climate action legible and simultaneously exposed the need for better rules, higher quality data, and ethical use of metrics.
The takeaway is this. CO2e gave us a shared vocabulary that brought climate into the language of capital and consumption. That made progress possible. But it also means the words we use and the definitions we choose matter. Ask who set the accounting rules, what assumptions were made, and whether the numbers reflect real-world reductions or just clever bookkeeping.
If you enjoyed this unpacking, give us a like, subscribe, and share so more overlooked origin stories get unboxed. So did a single spreadsheet-friendly unit really rewire corporate climate talk? Yes, and now knowing how it happened helps us decide whether the language serves the planet or just the balance sheet.